Abel's theorem, one half of Abel's theorem says that these two invariants are defined modulo rational equivalence, and the other half of Abel's theorem, the converse, is what comes out of Bloch-Davidson 4, that if these two invariants are zero, then the cycle is rationally equivalent to zero. So in that sense, it's like an extension of the classical Abel's theorem. In the general case, if you assume that x is defined over the rationals and use the QNIT decomposition, so we have a variety defined, this variety x defined over q, and an algebraic cycle defined over k, and you do the spread construction. Here now you really do need to think about the ambiguities that arise in the spread construction, and the technical word is to use existing theorems about the homology of algebraic varieties. In particular, both LHS theorems have to be used, the primitive decomposition has to be used, and the fact that you're working with a spread. The fact that you're working with a spread comes in that if you take the family of algebraic varieties, there's a spread, then the Hodge class is absolute Hodge. Hodge conjecture implies that it's absolute Hodge, so it's invariant when you move. So taking the QNIT decomposition and taking out the ambiguities, you organize that by the following picture. This is beginning from the cohomology of x in top degree. This is in degrees 2p and 2p minus 1. And you organize, so to speak, the first half of the QNIT decomposition by this picture. So this is in degree 2p. This is in degree 2p minus 1. Now, ordinarily, when you want to take the multiplicity of a cycle, the cycle has to be homologous to zero. Here, a little remark is that in the tensor product, if the first pieces here in the fundamental class are zero, then the first pieces in the Abel-Jacobi are defined. So we saw a special case of that, but the classical special case is that if this is zero, that's the fundamental class, then this one, which is the Abel-Jacobi, is defined. This doesn't really enter. It's there, but you don't see it classically. You can consider it, but you don't need to. In the case of zero cycles on the surface, this was the trace of an invariant, and that being zero was necessary that this be defined. And that's how the picture goes up the line. So the filtration on the Chao-Bruchsen we propose is defined by this picture, the hard line under the brackets, and the successive quotients are defined theoretically by this. And the fact is that if you have an algebraic cycle for which all of this stuff is zero, then using the general Hodge conjecture and the LHS theory and so on, you can replace it by a rational equivalent cycle defined over q bar, remember x is defined over q, for which the fundamental class on the product and the Abel-Jacobi on the product are zero. And then the fourth part of Bloch-Davidson tells you this is rationally equivalent to zero, and then that implies that the original one is. So here the point is that all of what you don't see in this picture is in the ambiguity. So all that you need to consider, if you have the fourth part of Bloch-Davidson, is the Hodge theoretic pieces that are in this picture here. So, for example, if you have a class that's in filtration level q plus 1, and then it's defined over field of transcendence degree less than or equal to q, then it's rationally equivalent to zero. That should be q plus 2, I think. So for q equals 0, that's the fourth part of Bloch-Davidson. This is just an extension. Conversely, if you have something that's in filtration level q in the Chao, then it's the sum of cycles defined over fields of transcendence degree q. So it's really saying that in the case of the surface of the variety defined over q, the filtration and transcendence level of cycles are roughly the same. So it's a small application if you have a zero cycle on a field on a surface defined over q, and if the second on a regular surface, I let that out, of degree 0, and if the field has no homomorphic Q forms, that's independent of which model you take for the field, then the cycle is rationally equivalent to zero. So that's the sort of thing that comes out of this construction. So the conclusion then is that for higher coordinations, the field of definition enters into the Hodge theory of the Hodge theoretic invariance of the cycle. If you have a variety that's not defined over Q, but defined over any field, you have to take the spread both of the variety and of the cycles. And the original argument that Mark and I had was not complete. It was completed by referee in the paper using Marita Saito's mixed Hodge motif papers. Since then, a more elementary argument has been given by Di Cataldo and Guarini using the decomposition theorem of Davidson, Bernstein, Guarini, Cobbett. So I think in general now this picture that I did with this unit can be done if you use a little very tight filtration or everything coming out of the decomposition theorem. I'd like to talk a little bit about some of the implications of the Hodge conjecture on the geometry of normal functions. This is an old story, normal function story. So I'll say a story back to Poincaré and then Lefschetz, and I'll give a bit of a history as I go on. The point, though, will be to say, okay, suppose that the Hodge class comes from a cycle. Then what can one say about the geometry of a normal function associated to the Hodge class? So we're going to briefly recall the definition of normal functions, or classical definition, and generalize that to what I'll call extended normal functions. And then if you look at an even-dimensional variety in projective space, and you will allow yourselves to re-embed it with higher degree as necessary, and that will come out in the argument, and blow up the, again, blow up as needed the space of hypersurface sections, this means that you're fathering your even-dimensional variety by odd-dimensional subvarieties. And in this case, the primitive part of the Hodge group will be isomorphic to the extended normal functions. So to each Hodge class, there's one of these objects, extended normal function. So that'll be the first point. The second point is that an extended normal function has a singular set. And the singular set only appears in coordination true. You don't see it when you have a one-parameter family. And moreover, if the Hodge class comes from a cycle, then if you take a high enough degree embedding in projective space, the singular set is non-empty. In fact, you can describe the singular set, again, always assuming that the Hodge class comes from a cycle. You can describe it in the following way. That if you look at it most, and this will be sufficient when we're doing it, most nodal hypersurfaces, the singular set are the nodal hypersurfaces that support an algebraic subvariety of dimension n, so codimension n-1 here, that has non-zero intersection number with a Hodge class. So the singularities are picking up the hypersurfaces that support cycles with non-zero intersection number with a Hodge class, assuming the Hodge class itself comes from a cycle. And finally, if time permits, I want to talk a little bit about the normal function pulling back some of the universal optics that are defined in the Poincare line bundle and the Figure line bundle, and relating those to the group law, or the group structure on the space of normal functions. With regards to that last point, the geometric implications of a normal of a Hodge class coming from a cycle on what the pullback of these universal bundles is not understood. I think it's an interesting question, but it's certainly not understood. And extended normal function, so this is going to be something defined over smooth variety S. And in the variety, we have a divisor, and we'll have what I'm going to call quasi-local normal crossing. Quasi-local normal crossing is like normal crossing, except you don't have to have the hypersurfaces always form part of the coordinate system. You have to have transversality, like here. So it's an extension of local normal crossing. And we'll look at the variation of Hodge structure of weight 2n minus 1 over the smooth part of the variety. And the most important thing is that you assume, and you have a point on the discriminant locus, that the monogromies around the branches, they're not singular, but they don't necessarily form the coordinate system, but there is a transversality. The monogromies should commute. So that's quasi-local normal crossing. And then the canonical extension of the variation of Hodge structure on the open part across the discriminant, starting the geometric case by Menefee and Steenbrink, and using the work of Tehane, Kaplan, Schmidt, Pejuar, and others in this variation of Hodge structure case. The upside is that the Hodge bundle, the Hodge filtration, and the Gaussian connection extend to the whole complete parameter space. Over the non-singular part, one has the sheaf of sections of the family of intermediate Jacobians, with a condition on what happens when you locally lift the section of the function to the cohomology, what happens in your product Gaussian connection. That's explained here. So classically, a normal function was a section of the sheaf of Jacobians, or intermediate Jacobians, over the smooth part, with the property that around the point of the discriminant locus, it should lift in a single-valued way. And I'll denote that sheaf by JE, so the extension of the sheaf of sections of intermediate Jacobians across the discriminant locus. Where these derive from, geometrically, is the following. If you have a variety estimation 2n, if you have a primitive algebraic cycle whose fundamental class is a primitive class, that means you intersect the cycle with a hyperplane section or a hypersurface section, and it's homologous to 0. If you take a left-hand pencil, this was the classical case, that means that you have finally many singular fibers with one node. Then this class is still 0 on the node. You can think of it moving in a right equivalence, you don't change the fundamental class, and you can move it off the node. The normal function then given by the algebraic cycle is the point to the intermediate Jacobian corresponding to this algebraic cycle that's homologous to 0 on the fiber. So you think of an algebraic surface and an algebraic one cycle on it, this intersection of each fiber is a divisor of degree 0 on the algebraic curve, and take the point of the Jacobian. It's an extension of that. Over the nodal hypersurface section, you have the generalized Jacobian, which is a C-sharp extension of the intermediate Jacobian of the canonical desingularization. So I left a little gap there, meaning it's not compact. So these normal functions, in the classical case of curves on the surface, were what were used by Lefschetz. They were introduced by Poincare, exactly the same curves on the surface, and were used by Lefschetz in his proof of the 1-1 theorem. For n bigger than or equal to 2, the normal functions have been of limited use, I think, because of the failure of Jacobian inversion that I mentioned earlier. So Lefschetz said that if you have a Hodge class, it comes from a normal function. If you use Jacobian inversion with dependence on parameters, that traces out a cycle on the surface, and that was his proof of the 1-1 theorem, the idea behind it. But that doesn't work in higher dimensions because Jacobian inversion fails. I want to talk now about what extended normal functions are and do a few speculations. The notion of extended normal function is again something that goes back some time. I think Ron and I worked on this many years ago. But at that time, I think that this could be the foundational understanding of how a Hodge structure degenerates over a high-dimensional base. Wasn't really in place, and one really needs that to make sense out of this. Where is the... So the extended normal functions, an extended normal function is given by a normal function over the open smooth part. And around the discriminant locus, instead of saying it has a single value lifting, what you say is that when you take any generator of the fundamental group of the discriminant, and you analytically continue a lifting around that, and you allow yourself to multiply by an integer to give it a torsion, that should be in the image of monogromy minus the identity of a cycle. So it's saying that you lift this normal function and you analytically continue it, that should be modulo torsion, the same thing as the monogromy applied to a cycle, but that cycle depends on this element of the local fundamental group you have. So for the one-dimensional base, because you have only one generator of the local fundamental group, this turns out to always be satisfied. It's a consequence of the Clebsch-Schmidt exact sequence. So extended normal functions and normal functions are the same over a one-dimensional base. What the Clebsch-Schmidt exact sequence says is that the vanishing cycles and the invariant cycles are essentially the same up to torsion, and that's the basic fact that's used here. But over a high-dimensional base, they may be different, and that leads into an exact C sequence with some function, which is supported in codimension 2. By definition, then, the singular set of an extended normal function is the support of what it goes into here. So the basic facts are first that a Hodge class gives an extended normal function. Classically, it was known for Lefschetz pencils that a Hodge class gave a normal function, something specific I worked on many years ago, and the general form of that for any family of varieties with a one-dimensional base and any singularities. But using normal functions was done by Steve Tucker. That's the definitive form, really, for the theorem on normal functions with one-dimensional base. And what one has to do here is to just see that you, in fact, get an extended normal function if you allow a high-dimensional base. That's the first fact. The second is that if you have a Hodge class that comes from a cycle, then the singular set of the extended normal function is non-empty for high-degree hypersurface sections. Okay, so somehow having that cycle generates singularities of this extended normal function. The way it generates singularities, roughly speaking, is to have a singular point. It means that the intersection of the cycle with the fiber is not homologous to 0. And that then creates a singularity for the normal function. So I think this suggests, and this is really speculation, studying the geometry of the singular set. What is its codimension? What is its fundamental class? Now, the singular, normal function is a Hodge-theoretic object. And the fact of a Hodge class, you have a normal function is something formulated purely Hodge-theoretically. And at least in principle, the work that has been done and is currently being extended by Kato and Usui on partial compactification of the classified spaces for Hodge structures would say that the singular set is a pullback of some boundary component in this partial compactification under an Alford-Jacobi type map. So if this Kato-Usui theory works out as it does in the classical case, so that occurs on the surface, then you'll have an estimate on the codimension of the singular set. If it's not empty, then the codimension will be bounded from above by some Hodge-theoretic quantity. I'll say what that is in the classical case in a minute. On the other hand, if the Hodge class, take it comes from a cycle, then the singular set has an algebra geometric description. And so it has a codimension that you can write down in terms of few homology and so on. It's an algebra geometric object. So that will give you some relation between an algebra geometric object, a number, and a Hodge-theoretic number. So let's just take the classical case of curves on the surface. Then by semi-stable reduction as well, you can always assume the singular fibers are total. And the codimension of the singular locus turns out to be the number of nodes, but with a correction from the h to 0 of the surface. So the number of nodes is the expected codimension, because when you look at the boundary of moduli curves, you have a k-nodal curve. Those are codimension k in moduli. So there's some correction of a Hodge-theoretic curve, of a Hodge-theoretic nature. And where that comes from is that one should look not just at an isolated surface, but we should let the surface vary in moduli. So suppose the surface has some moduli space. And the surface is sitting in a big projected space, you let that vary over moduli. That's the strict S, which you'll see the small s on the regular S before. In the moduli space, you have the so-called mirror-less zones. That's the sub-variety where you have your Hodge class remaining a Hodge class. And you vary it on the right surface, you have a curve on the surface that usually disappears. And you move the surface, that Hodge class usually also disappears. You look at the sub-locus of moduli, where it remains a Hodge class. This is an algebraic sub-variety by theorem given for the Italian Kaplan. And in this larger object, where you let the normal function vary also over the left locus, then the codimension is correct. So what that suggests is that really one should not study Hodge classes, cycles, and so on for a fixed variety, but you should let the variety vary moduli. Those parameters enter geometrically into the problem. So one can go on to analyze, in the classical case, the sort of geometry of the singularity of the normal function. It's a very nice story. Of course, the one theorem is used to help you analyze it. But knowing that, then you get a very clear picture of what the singularities look like. You can calculate the fundamental class, things like that. If you go to higher dimensions, and if this Kato-Usui stuff works, this is a very difficult theory. I mean, it's extremely complex what they're doing. Then what's going to come out would be some estimate saying an algebra geometric number, cohomology group, is bounded by a Hodge-theoretic number. And I don't know what that k inequality is going to be, but if you just play around with it, you get some feeling for the sort of thing it's going to be. And what it's doing is showing that when you get in higher dimensions codimension, you get for Hodge-theoretic reasons correction terms to dimension counts that I never thought of in codimension 1. So I'll mention a simple one here and close with that. If you go back to the case of algebraic surfaces and look at moduli algebraic surfaces, the expected codimension of the node or less locus, the locus where a class remains of type 1,1, is the number of conditions that a class be of type 1,1, which is the Hodge number h to 0. So expected here means that that's what a dimension count will give you at first sight, and that's usually true for surfaces, but not always. So if you take, for example, a general surfaces in T3, this works. So now go up to dimension 4-dimensional variety. Then the expected codimension of the node or less locus should be the number of conditions to be a Hodge class in 4,0 plus 3,1. But that's wrong, because if you look at the differential of the defining equations, they all land at 3,1. So your refined estimate is 3,1. So that's wrong. If you look at the tangent vectors of the things that H1 is saying, sorry, so the messy overhead, and annihilate the Hodge class and look at the cup product of those in the H31 part, then the right number here for the expected codimension has this correction. This is a second order correction. The first correction was first order, and this is a second order correction, and it goes no further. So there's some phenomenon coming at second order in the geometry of these loci or Hodge loci, if you like, that's entering in higher codimension. And it's that sort of thing that if one just guesses what you would get in this inequality seems to turn up. So to conclude, I mentioned, because I think it's kind of a pretty little fact, what happens when you take these normal functions and you pull back universal line bundles? So you have polarized, the varieties of polarized complex 4i, they have line bundles on them. You have line bundle stacks, if you like, that you can make sense out of your chain classes and so on. And only for less potentials, it's not known when you get things that are more interesting. If you take the pullback of the theta bundle under the sum, and you take this relation that looks like the group law on an elliptic curve, then that gives you the cup product. These are cohomology classes in the middle dimension, so the cup product is an integer. These are line bundles on T1, so they have a degree. That's the relation, so it's reminiscent of the group law on zero cycles on an elliptic curve. Or if you go back to Poincare line bundle, where that's on the product of something itself, under the product of two normal functions, you again get this cup product of zeta and zeta prime. I think that's interesting for several reasons, but one of them is that if you look, let's just do classically look at surfaces in T3, and look at a Hodge class on the surface, we know it's an algebraic cycle. What is the least degree surface you can get that will support that cycle? Receiving curve, you can get that will support the cycle. And the lower bound is given by the self-intersection number of Hodge class itself, or minus that, because this is a primitive class. So zeta squared, or the products, if you like, that number is, I think, a critical number in sort of geometry that's going to that's floating around for these normal functions. So in conclusion, then, I think for those Hodge classes that come from cycles, there seems to be some interesting geometry in its normal function. It's not at all like a classical picture where you had inversion and you immediately got a nice construction. But going to the singular set seems to give some geometry, or they give some geometry in this object. So thank you. theory that you blow up, and these singularities don't behave well under blowing up. So if you want to capture them this way, you need to restrict. So you look at a point surface containing a line, and you see the picture there is very clear. That's right, yeah. So what you want is to transverse lines any subset less than or equal to codivision, be transversely. And you need community monochromy. The community monochromy is an essential part. And the reason is what one is looking here, if you think of nodal hypersurfaces, the mapping of nodal hypersurfaces y and x to moduli of hypersurfaces is not transverse at the boundary. It's that non-transversality that's coming in. The non-transversality, in the case of the classical case, is exactly the h2 number of surfaces. That's how non-transverse these local curves meet the boundary moduli of curve. And for higher dimensions, you get into second order behavior. So if you're going to do a section theory, this is going to be something quite different from what is had classically. Any other questions? No, thank you. To be able to give some connotation of this 61st Mateo Professor Green, who gave very big information in mathematics in my area. And I also thank the organizers to be able to discuss for giving me these opportunities. And the subject of my talk is, and happy birthday, and the subject of my talk is the following statement. So associated relation for multiple data value. This is multiple data implies harmonic application for this multiple data value. This work is collaborated with when I visited Institute for Advanced Study 2 years ago, and the very essential part of this work is due to Green. He taught me the very essential part of this work very patiently, and what is multiple data value is defined as follows. Here, multiple data value is for let K1, K2, Kn be positive integer, and assuming that Kn is greater than or equal to 2, we define multiple data value K1, Kn by the sum of K1, Kn, K1 to K1, Kn to Kn. And the harmonic subrelation is obtained by rearranging the summation of two products. Rearrange summation of two products of multiple data values. So this second relation is the origin of the second relation is quite combinatorial origin. And first, I will explain the first relation. But the first relation is quite geometric origin. And before going into algebra, I want to explain what is necessary to consider this problem. So if x is for example, if x is a variety over 2, there is 2 commutative, then x is commutative of x is quotient 2, and there is another commutative, one commutative over x. X. But by the classical composite theory, if you tensor with C, then this two group is isomorphic, and there is canonical isomorphism. And this is called composite map. This isomorphism is called composite map. And if X is very special by, for example, moduli space of genus zero curve, moduli space of n-pointed genus zero curve, or moduli space of n-pointed genus zero curve minus some divisor, modulo some another divisor, then this period, the comparison, using this comparison, we can get the period. And this period is expressed by multiple data value. And multiple data value is nothing but the collection of general associates. And so what I want to show is for any associator we can prove the harmonic subrelation. So I want to define another cohomology theory whose period, another new cohomology theory, which gives rise some composite something like fake composite map, but not to composite map, but some fake composite map. This cohomology theory gives rise to some fake composite map. And using this fake composite map, the period is given by some quotient of given associator. So to define the associator is related to the composite map of two fundamental groups theory. So, two theory of fundamental groups called the projective line minus 3 points. And this associate is related to two theory of fundamental groups. One is base fundamental group, and one is ground fundamental group for C1 minus 3 points. But this two fundamental group is so associator is related to the sum isomorphism of these two fundamental groups. If you choose a classical Poisson map, then this associator is related to the Greenfeld associator. Now, the problem is this fundamental group depends on the choice. So to speak, the mixed structure introduced in this Q2 Q vector space depends on the mixed structure, depends on the base point. So what I want to introduce algebra is I don't want to forget information which depends on the base point of this isomorphism. Now I will give the definition of algebra. It is algebra, but it depends on the base point. Something like algebra, but it depends on the base point. Let's take here for first function and associator. Let's take here space, a Poisson space, and take here a point of X. Then we can define a fundamental group of X with base point X. And also, this is a group, and we can define a group algebra of this group. This is multiplied like this over Q. Then this is algebra. But of course, it is not necessary to for the base point to we can choose two base points to define the fundamental algebra. For let X and Y be 2 points in this X, then we can define the set of homotopy equivalence of path from X to Y up to the homotopy. This is group point. So this is group, and this is group point. Now, algebra is if you consider Q linear of this set, and we consider a system of this. This is the Q vector space, and we consider a system of Q vector space indexed by 2 points. And this is algebra. This is algebra. Now I will give axiom of algebra. Axiom. This is typical algebra. Axiom of algebra. The first algebra is theoretic invariance of a zero cycle. I'm thinking of this as giving Abel's theorem. One half of Abel's theorem says that these two invariants are defined modulo rational equivalence, and the other half of Abel's theorem, the converse, is what comes out of 1 thing 4, that if these two invariants are 0, then the cycle is rational equivalent to 0. So in that sense, it's like an extension of the classical Abel's theorem. In the general case, if you assume that X is defined over the rationals, and use the Q decomposition, so we have a variety of types of variety X defined over Q, and an algebraic cycle defined over K, and a good spread construction. Here now you really do need to think about the ambiguities that arise in the spread construction, and the technical word is to use existing theorems about the homology of algebraic varieties. I think both elective theorems have to be used, the decomposition has to be used, and the fact that you're working with a spread. The fact that you're working with a spread comes in that if you take the family of algebraic varieties, there's a spread, then the Hodge class is absolute Hodge. Hodge implies that it's an absolute Hodge, so it's invariant when you move. So taking the Q decomposition and taking out the ambiguities, you organize that by the following picture. This is beginning from the cohomology of X in top degree. This is in degrees 2p and 2p minus 1. And you organize, so to speak, the first half of the Q decomposition by this picture. So this is in degree 2p, this is in degree 2p minus 1. Now, ordinarily, when you want to take the homotopy of a cycle has to be homologous to 0. Here, a little remark is that in the tensor product, if the first pieces here in the fundamental class are 0, then the first pieces in the homotopy are defined. So we saw a special case of that, but the classical special case is that if this is 0, that's the fundamental class, then this one, which is the homotopy, is defined. This doesn't really enter. It's there, but you don't see it classically. You can consider it, but you don't need to. In the case of 0 cycles on the surface, this was the trace of an invariant, and that being 0 is necessary that this be defined. And that's how the picture goes up the line. So the filtration on the child groups we propose is defined by this picture, the card volume of the brackets, and the successive quotients are defined theoretically by this. And the fact is that if you have an algebraic cycle for which all of this stuff is 0, then using the general Hodge conjecture and Leclerc theory and so on, you can replace it by a rational equivalent cycle defined over Q bar, remember X is defined over Q, for which the fundamental class on the product and the opposite total product is 0. And then the fourth part of block-Beilinson tells you this is Rice equal to 0, and then that implies that the original one is. So here the point is that all of what you don't see in this picture is in the ambiguity. So all that you need to consider if you have the fourth part of block-Beilinson is the Hodge-theoretic pieces that are in this picture here. So, for example, if you have a class that's in filtration level Q plus 1, and it's defined over field and transcended to be less than or equal to Q, then it's Rice equal to 0, that should be Q plus 2, I think. So for Q equals 0, that's the fourth part of block-Beilinson. This is just an extension. Conversely, if you have something that's in filtration level Q in the tau, then it's the sum of cycles defined over field and transcended to degree Q. So if you're saying that the indication of surface of the right is defined over Q, the filtration and transcendence level of cycles are roughly the same. So it's a small application if you have a zero cycle on a field on a surface defined over Q, and if the second on a regular surface, I left that out, on degree 0, and if the field has no homomorphic conformance, that's independent of which model you take for the field, then the cycle is Rice equal to 0. That's the sort of thing that comes out of this construction. So the conclusion then is that for higher codifications, the field of definition enters into the Hodge theory of the Hodge-theoretic invariance of the cycle. If you have a variety that's not defined over Q, but defined over any field, you have to take the square both of the variety and of the cycles. And the original argument that Mark and I had was not complete. It was completed by a referee in a paper using Ethan Saito mixed Hodge motifs papers. Since then, a more elementary argument has been given by Di Cataldo and Di Guarini using the decomposition theorem of Beilinson, Bernstein, Guarini, Copper. So I think in general now this picture that I did with just students can be done if you use a very tight filtration coming out of the decomposition theorem. I'd like to talk a little bit about some of the implications of the Hodge conjecture on the geometry of normal functions. This is an old story, normal function story. So I'll say a story back to Poincaré and then Lefschetz, and a little bit of history as I go on. The point, though, will be to say, okay, suppose that the Hodge class comes from a cycle. Then what can one say about the geometry of a normal function associated to the Hodge class? So we're going to briefly recall the definition of normal functions from a classical definition and generalize that to what I'll call extended normal functions. And then if you look at an even-dimensional variety in projective space, and here we're allowing ourselves to re-embed it with higher degree as necessary, that will come out in the argument, and blow up the, and again, blow up as needed the space of hypersurface sections. This means that you're fibering your even-dimensional variety by odd-dimensional subvarieties. And in this case, the primitive part of the Hodge group will be isomorphic to the extended normal functions. So to each Hodge class, there's one of these objects extended normal function. So that'll be the first point. The second point is that an extended normal function has a singular set. And the singular set only appears in codification 2. You don't see it when you have a one-parameter family. And moreover, if the Hodge class comes from a cycle, then if you take a high enough degree embedding in projective space, the singular set is non-empty. In fact, you can describe the singular set, again, always assuming that the Hodge class comes from a cycle, you can describe it in the following way. That if you look at it most, and this will be sufficient when we're doing it, most nodal hypersurfaces, the singular set are the nodal hypersurfaces that support algebraic subvarieties of division n, so codification n-1 here, that has non-zero intersection number with a Hodge class. So the singularities are picking up the hypersurfaces that support cycles with non-zero intersection number with a Hodge class, assuming the Hodge class itself is the cycle. So finally, if time permits, I want to talk a little bit about the normal function, pulling back some of the universal objects that are defined in the Poincaré line bundle and the Figure line bundle, and relating those to the group law, or the group structure on the space of normal functions. With regards to that last point, the geometric implications of a normal function, of a Hodge class coming from a cycle, on what the pullback of these universal bundles is not understood. I think it's an interesting question, but it's certainly not understood. And extended normal function, so this is going to be something defined over smooth variety S. And in the variety, we have a divisor that will have what I'm going to call quasi-local normal crossings. Quasi-local normal crossing is like normal crossing, except you don't have to have the hypersurfaces always form part of the coordinate system. You have to have transversality, like here. So it's an extension of local normal crossing. And we'll look at the variation of Hodge structure of weight 2n minus 1 over the smooth part of the variety. And the most important thing is that you assume that you have a point on the discriminant locus that the mononomials around the branches, they're not singular, but they don't necessarily form part of the coordinate system, but there is a transversality. The mononomials should be mu. So that's quasi-local normal crossing. So then the canonical extension of the full variation of the Hodge structure of the open part across the discriminant locus. So in the geometric case, by Benefti and Steenbrink, and using the work of Johannes Appelschmidt, Pejuar, and others in the variation of Hodge structure case. The upside is that the Hodge bundle, the Hodge filtration, the Gaussian connection extend to the whole complete parameter space. Over the non-singular part, one has the sheaf of sections of the family of intermediate Jacobians with a condition on what happens when you locally lift the section of the quotient to the cohomology, what happens when you apply the Gaussian connection. That's explained here. So classically, a normal function was a section of the sheaf of Jacobians, or intermediate Jacobians, over the smooth part with the property that around the point of the discriminant locus, it should lift in a single value way. And I'll denote that sheaf by JE, sort of the extension of the sheaf of sections of intermediate Jacobians across the discriminant locus. Where these arise from, geometrically, is the following. If you have a variety has dimension 2n, if you have a primitive algebraic cycle whose fundamental class is a primitive class, that means you intersect the cycle with a hypersurface section or hypersurface section, and its homologous is 0. If you take a Lefschetz pencil, this was a classical case, that means that you have finally many singular fibers with one node. then this class is still 0 on the node. If you think of it moving in a right equivalence, you don't change the fundamental class, you can move it off the node. The normal function then given by the algebraic cycle is going to be intermediate Jacobian corresponding to this algebraic cycle that's modeled as 0 on the fiber. If you think of algebraic surface and algebraic one cycle on it, this intersection with each fiber is a divisor of degree 0 on the algebraic curve. You take the formula in the Jacobian. It's an extension of that. Over the nodal hypersurface section, you have the generalized Jacobian, which is some extension of the intermediate Jacobian under canonical synchronization. So I left a little gap there, meaning it's not compact. So these normal functions, in the classical case of curves on surface, were what were used by Lefschetz to reproduce by one grade, exactly the same curves on surface, and were used by Lefschetz to get the proof of the 110. For n bigger than or equal to 2, the normal functions have been of limited use, I think, because of the failure of Jacobian version that I mentioned earlier. So Lefschetz said that if you have a Hodge class, it comes from a normal function. If you use Jacobian version with dependence on parameters, that traces out a cycle on the surface, and that was his proof of the 110, the idea behind it. But that doesn't work in high dimensions because Jacobian version fails. I want to talk now about what extended normal functions are and do a few speculations. This notion of extended normal function is again something that goes back sometime, I think I worked on this many years ago. But at that time, I think that at least for me, the foundational understanding of how a Hodge function degenerates over a high-dimensional base wasn't really in place. One really needs that to make sense out of this. So the extended normal functions, an extended normal function is given by a normal function over the open smooth part. And around the discriminant locus, instead of saying it has a single value lifting, what you say is that when you take the generator of the fundamental of the discriminant and let the continuum lifting around that, and you allow yourself to multiply by an integer to give it a torsion, then that should be in the image of monography minus the identity of a cycle. So it's saying that you lift this normal function and you analytically continue it, that should be modular torsion, the same thing as the monography applied to a cycle, but that cycle depends on this element of the local fundamental group you have. So for one-dimensional base, because you have only one generator of the local fundamental group, this turns out to always be satisfied. It's a consequence of the condition of exact sequence. So extended normal functions and normal functions are the same over a one-dimensional base. What the condition of exact sequence is that the vanishing cycles and the invariant cycles are essentially the same on the torsion, and that's the basic practice used here. But over a high-dimensional base, they may be different. And that leads into an exact sequence with some function, which is supported in combination 2. By definition, then, the singular set of extended normal function is supported when it goes into n. So the basic fact refers that a Hodge class gives an extended normal function. Consequently, it was known for Lefschetz pencils that a Hodge class gave a normal function, something specific I worked on years ago, in the general form of that for any family of varieties with a one-dimensional base and any singularities. But using normal functions was done by Steve Sucker. That's the vicinity form, really, for the zero normal functions with one-dimensional base. And what one has to do here is to just see that you, in fact, get an extended normal function if you allow high-dimensional base. That's the first fact. The second is that if you have a Hodge class that comes from a cycle, then the singular set of the extended normal function is not empty for high-degree hypersurface sessions. And so somehow having that cycle generates singularities of this extended normal function. The way it generates singularities, roughly speaking, is to have a singular point means that the intersection of cycle and fiber is not homologous to 0. And that then creates singularity for the normal function. So I think this suggests, and this is pure speculation, studying the geometry of the singular set. What is its combination? What is its fundamental class? Now, the singular normal function is a Hodge theoretic object. And the fact of a Hodge class, you have a normal function, something formulated purely Hodge theoretically. And in recent principles, the work that has been done in this work being extended by calculation theory on partial compactification of pre-classified spaces for Hodge structures, let's say that the singular set is a pullback of some boundary component in this partial compactification under an almost Jacobi type map. So if this Kato-Usui theory works out as it does in the classical case, when family occurs on the surface, then you'll have an estimate on the combination of the singular set. If it's not empty, then the combination will be bounded from above by some Hodge theoretic quantity. And I'll say what that is in the classical case in a minute. On the other hand, if the Hodge class comes from a cycle, then the singular set has an algebraic description. And so it has combination that you can write down for what you call homology and so on. It's an algebraic object. So that will give you some relation between an algebraic object, a number, and a Hodge theoretic number. So let's just take the classical case of curves on the surface. Then by semi-stable reduction, so you can always assume singular fibers in total.